The Soviet era was a time of extremes. On one hand, the USSR rapidly industrialized, transforming itself from a rural backwater into a global superpower. Massive factories, new cities, and ambitious projects sprang up seemingly overnight. On the other hand, the cost was staggering. Political purges, forced collectivization, and famines took a heavy toll, and dissent was crushed with an iron fist. The dream of a worker's paradise often turned into a nightmare for those who dared to question the system. Then came World War II, a conflict that would test the Soviet Union like never before. When Nazi Germany invaded in 1941, the USSR faced annihilation. But the vastness of Russian territory, the resilience of its people, and the brutal winter once again proved decisive. The Soviets not only survived, they pushed the invaders back, eventually capturing Berlin and emerging as one of the world's two superpowers. In the aftermath, the USSR expanded its influence across Eastern Europe, installing communist governments from Poland to East Germany and beyond. The Cold War era saw the Soviet Union locked in a tense rivalry with the United States. The two superpowers competed in everything from nuclear arms to space exploration, their influence shaping events across the globe. Soviet support flowed to allies in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, while at home, the government maintained strict control over every aspect of life. Propaganda painted the USSR as a model society. But beneath the surface, economic stagnation and growing discontent simmered. By the 1980s, it was clear that the Soviet system was in trouble. Attempts at reform under leaders like Mikhail Gorbachev came too late to reverse decades of decline. The once mighty Union began to unravel as republics declared independence and the old order crumbled. In 1991, the USSR officially dissolved, ending an era that had seen Russia rise, fall, and rise again on the world stage. The collapse left behind a new map, a new set of challenges, and a Russia that was once again searching for its place in a rapidly changing world. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 was more than just the end of a political system. It was a seismic event that sent shockwaves through every corner of the vast Russian landscape. Overnight, the world's largest country was split apart, and 15 new nations emerged from the ruins of what had once been a single, sprawling superpower. For Russia, the transition was nothing short of chaotic. The old certainties vanished, and the country was thrust into a period of uncertainty, upheaval, and reinvention. In the early 1990s, Russia faced a storm of challenges. The economy, once tightly controlled by the state, spiraled into crisis as markets opened up and industries collapsed. Ordinary people watched their savings evaporate, while a handful of well-connected insiders, soon known as oligarchs, snapped up the nation's wealth at bargain prices. Crime soared, and the social safety net that had supported millions during the Soviet era all but disappeared. For many, it felt as if the country was unraveling at the seams. But even as Russia struggled to find its footing, the sheer scale of the nation remained impossible to ignore. Stretching across 11 time zones, from the forests of Kaliningrad to the icy reaches of Kamchatka, Russia was still the world's largest country by far. Its vast reserves of oil, gas, and minerals gave it a powerful hand to play on the global stage. Even as its political and economic systems lurched from crisis to crisis, the 1990s were marked by turmoil. But the arrival of Vladimir Putin at the turn of the millennium signaled a new era. Promising stability and a return to national pride, Putin moved quickly to reassert control over the country's resources and rein in the power of the oligarchs. Under his leadership, Russia's economy rebounded and the state regained much of its lost authority. Yet this resurgence came at a price. Critics accused the government of stifling dissent, curbing press freedom, and using the country's vast energy wealth as a tool of political leverage. Meanwhile, the legacy of empire continued to haunt Russia's borders. The sudden independence of former Soviet republics sparked a series of disputes and conflicts, from the frozen battlefields of Chechnya to the simmering tensions in Ukraine and Georgia. Each crisis raised new questions about Russia's identity and its place in the world. Was it a European power, an Asian giant, or something entirely unique, a bridge between continents shaped by centuries of conquest and survival? In recent years, Russia has continued to make headlines, often at the center of global controversies. Accusations of election interference, cyber attacks, and shadowy influence campaigns have kept the world's eyes fixed on Moscow. At home, the government has tightened its grip, while ordinary Russians navigate a landscape shaped by both nostalgia for the past and uncertainty about the future. Yet for all the turmoil and transformation, one thing remains unchanged: the sheer, staggering size of Russia. Its vastness is both a blessing and a burden, a source of pride, but also a constant challenge to govern and defend. As the world looks ahead, the question lingers: will Russia's immense territory continue to be its greatest strength? Or will the pressures of history, geography, and global politics force yet another dramatic transformation? The story of Russia is far from over, and as the past has shown, its next chapter could be just as unpredictable and just as fascinating as everything that came before. The push eastward was unlike anything Europe had seen before. Instead of organized armies, it was often bands of Cossacks, fierce, semi-nomadic warriors famed for their independence and skill on horseback, who led the charge. Driven by promises of land, freedom, and adventure, these explorers plunged into the unknown, braving frozen rivers, dense forests, and hostile tribes. Their exploits became the stuff of legend, as they established forts and trading posts that slowly stitched the Russian presence across the endless Siberian wilderness. Within a single century, Russian explorers had reached the shores of the Pacific Ocean, a journey that spanned thousands of miles and countless hardships. The lure of furs, so valuable they were called soft gold, drove many deeper into the wild, while others dreamed of glory and riches. The Russian flag was planted on the Kamchatka Peninsula, and soon after, daring expeditions crossed the Bering Strait, claiming Alaska for the Tsar. For a brief moment, Russian America stretched all the way to the edge of North America, a testament to the sheer audacity of this eastward drive. But the expansion wasn't just about land. Each new territory brought new challenges, unfamiliar peoples, harsh climates, and logistical nightmares. The Tsars responded with a mix of force and pragmatism, sending settlers, soldiers, and administrators to tame the frontier. Fortresses rose along the rivers, and new towns sprang up in the shadow of the taiga. The Russian state became a patchwork of cultures and landscapes, bound together by the will of its rulers and the resilience of its people. By the end of Ivan's reign, Russia had transformed from a collection of squabbling principalities into a sprawling empire, its borders stretching farther than any European power could imagine. The conquest of Siberia was more than just a land grab. It was a statement of intent. Russia was no longer content to defend its heartland. It was now a nation on the move, driven by a sense of destiny that would shape its future for centuries to come. And as the Tsars looked west and south, their ambitions would only grow, setting the stage for even greater clashes and conquests on the horizon. As Russia's borders stretched ever eastward, a new obsession began to take hold in the minds of its rulers: the West. The Tsars had conquered vast lands, but in the eyes of Europe, Russia was still seen as a distant, backward outpost, more Asian than European, more wild than civilized. That perception stung, and it was Peter the Great who decided to change it forever. His reign would become a whirlwind of transformation, war, and ambition, all driven by a single burning question: could Russia become a true European power? Peter was unlike any Tsar before him. Towering in stature and restless in spirit, he was fascinated by the innovations and luxuries of Western Europe. In a move that shocked his court, Peter disguised himself as a commoner and traveled incognito across Europe, working in shipyards, studying science, and absorbing everything he could about modern warfare and government. When he returned, he brought with him not just new ideas, but a fierce determination to drag Russia, kicking and screaming, into the modern age. The changes Peter unleashed were nothing short of revolutionary. He reformed the army, built a navy from scratch, and forced his nobles to adopt Western dress and customs. But his greatest ambition was to give Russia a window to the West, a warm water port that would connect his empire to the heart of European trade. At the time, the Baltic coast was controlled by Sweden, a formidable military power. Undeterred, Peter launched the Great Northern War, a brutal conflict that raged for over 2 decades. Against the odds, Russia emerged victorious, seizing territory along the Baltic and founding a brand new capital, St. Petersburg. Built on marshland and at a staggering human cost, the city was Peter's personal masterpiece, a symbol of Russia's new identity and its place among Europe's great powers. But the drive to modernize and expand didn't end with Peter. Decades later, Catherine the Great would take the throne and push Russia's ambitions even further. Catherine was a master of politics and image, projecting herself as both an enlightened ruler and a ruthless strategist. Her eyes turned south toward the Black Sea and the crumbling Ottoman Empire. Through a series of wars and shrewd alliances, Russia seized key ports and cities, securing access to the warm southern waters that had long eluded the Tsars. Catherine's reign also saw the dramatic partitions of Poland, a once mighty kingdom that was carved up by its neighbors. Russia claimed vast swathes of land, including most of Ukraine, Belarus, and Lithuania, further cementing its status as a continental giant. Under her rule, Russia's borders swelled, and its influence reached deeper into Europe than ever before. Yet for all its might, the Russian Empire was a house built on shaky foundations. The rapid expansion masked deep problems: a rigid, outdated political system, a struggling economy, and growing unrest among the people. The empire's sheer size made it hard to govern, and the patchwork of cultures and languages within its borders created constant tension. As the 19th century drew to a close, Russia stood at a crossroads, powerful but vulnerable, admired and feared in equal measure. The next chapter would bring even greater upheaval, as revolution and war threatened to tear the empire apart from within. As the 20th century dawned, the Russian Empire was teetering on the edge. Decades of rapid expansion had created a sprawling, diverse realm. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to show. The rigid rule of the Tsars, combined with economic hardship and social unrest, had left millions of ordinary Russians desperate for change. The world was entering a new era of technology, ideology, and global conflict, and Russia was about to be swept up in a storm that would reshape its destiny forever. The first shock came with World War I. Russia, allied with Britain and France, was drawn into a brutal conflict that exposed the empire's weaknesses. The war effort drained resources, shattered morale, and led to staggering losses on the battlefield. As the situation grew more desperate, anger boiled over at home. In 1917, a wave of strikes, protests, and mutinies erupted across the country. The centuries-old monarchy collapsed almost overnight, and the Tsar was forced to abdicate. But the chaos didn't end there. Competing factions vied for control, and soon, the country was plunged into a bitter civil war. Out of this chaos emerged the Bolsheviks, a radical group led by Vladimir Lenin. Promising peace, land, and bread, they seized power in the October Revolution and set about dismantling the old order. The civil war that followed was brutal, pitting the Reds against the Whites in a struggle that left the land scarred and millions dead. By 1923, the Bolsheviks had emerged victorious, and a new entity was born: the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR. Long before Russia's name echoed across continents, the land itself was a wild, untamed expanse, an endless sea of grass and forest stretching from the icy north to the sun-baked southern steppes. This region, which would one day become the heart of an empire, was once a crossroads for some of history's most mysterious and fearsome peoples. Imagine a place where the only borders were rivers and mountains, and where survival depended on the strength of your tribe and the sharpness of your blade. For centuries, these vast plains were a battleground for countless tribes and cultures. Indo-European wanderers, Germanic warriors, and nomadic horsemen all left their mark on the land. The Scythians, legendary for their horsemanship and gold-laden burial mounds, roamed these fields in ancient times, their names whispered in fear by the Greeks. Later, the Sarmatians, Huns, and Goths swept through, each wave bringing chaos and change. Some of these tribes would go on to challenge the might of Rome itself, while others vanished into the mists of history, leaving behind only fragments of legend and scattered artifacts. But this wasn't just a land of warriors. The endless steppe was also a highway for trade, migration, and ideas. Caravans carried goods and stories from distant lands, while new technologies and beliefs filtered in from the east and west. Yet, for all its promise, the region was anything but stable. Power shifted constantly, and no single group could hold the land for long. The lack of natural barriers meant that invasions were a constant threat, and alliances were as fragile as the morning frost. By the dawn of the first millennium, the stage was set for something new. The chaos and competition of these early centuries had forged a land of survivors, people hardened by conflict, but also open to new influences. It was here, in this crucible of cultures and ambitions, that the first sparks of a Russian identity would begin to flicker. But the story of how these scattered tribes would unite and eventually build the world's largest country was only just beginning. And what happened next would change the fate of Eurasia forever. While the steppes echoed with the thunder of hooves and the clash of rival tribes, a new force was quietly making its way into the heart of this wild land. From the cold, stormy coasts of Scandinavia, the Vikings, known in the east as the Varangians, set their sights far beyond the familiar fjords and forests of their homeland. Unlike the tales of Viking raids on England and France, these Norse adventurers weren't just looking for plunder. They saw opportunity in the rivers that cut through the endless Russian plains. And they came not only as warriors, but as traders, settlers, and rulers. Sailing sleek longships down the Volga, Dnieper, and Don, the Vikings carved out new routes that connected the Baltic Sea to the Black and Caspian Seas. Along these watery highways, they established outposts that would become the seeds of future cities, places like Kiev, Novgorod, and Staraya Ladoga. These settlements quickly grew into bustling centers of commerce, where Slavic farmers, Finno-Ugric hunters, and Norse merchants mingled, traded, and sometimes fought for control. But the Vikings didn't remain outsiders for long. Over time, they began to blend with the local Slavic population, marrying into powerful families and adopting local customs. The Norse rulers, known as the Rus, brought with them a new sense of order and ambition. They organized the scattered tribes into loose confederations, laying the groundwork for the first real states in the region. The most famous of these was Kievan Rus, a federation that, at its height, stretched from the Baltic to the Black Sea and became a major player in the politics of medieval Europe. This fusion of Norse and Slavic cultures sparked a transformation. The Rus introduced new systems of governance, built fortified towns, and established trade links that reached as far as Byzantium and the Islamic world. The region's first chronicles began to appear, recording the deeds of princes and the rise of cities. Religion, too, played a role as the influence of Orthodox Christianity began to seep in from the south, setting the stage for a spiritual and cultural shift that would echo for centuries. Yet, even as these early states flourished, their unity was fragile. Rival princes vied for power, and the threat of invasion was never far away. Still, the foundation had been laid. The chaotic patchwork of tribes was slowly giving way to something greater, a new identity, forged from the ambitions of Vikings and the resilience of Slavs. The story of Russia was no longer just about survival. It was about building a nation that could stand the test of time. And as the world would soon discover, the ambitions of these early rulers were only just beginning to unfold. Just as the early Russian states were finding their footing, a new and terrifying force swept in from the east, changing the course of history in ways no one could have predicted. The Mongols, nomadic horsemen led by the legendary Genghis Khan and his ruthless successors, descended on the region with a speed and ferocity that stunned the world. Their arrival was nothing short of apocalyptic. Cities that had flourished along the rivers like Kiev were reduced to smoldering ruins. Entire populations were uprooted or wiped out, and the survivors faced a grim new reality. The age of Mongol domination had begun. For nearly 2 centuries, the Mongols, known locally as the Golden Horde, held the Russian lands in a tight grip. They demanded heavy tribute from the northern principalities, draining resources and keeping the people in a constant state of fear. The Mongol Khans ruled from afar, but their influence was felt everywhere. Local princes were forced to travel long distances to the Khan's court, bowing low and begging for the right to govern their own lands. Any sign of rebellion was met with swift and brutal punishment. Yet, in this era of darkness, something unexpected began to happen. While many cities struggled under Mongol rule, one small principality started to rise above the rest: Moscow. At first, Moscow was just another minor outpost, overshadowed by older, wealthier rivals like Novgorod and Tver, but its leaders were shrewd, playing the Mongols' game better than anyone else. By faithfully collecting tribute and crushing local uprisings on behalf of the Khan, the princes of Moscow earned special privileges and, crucially, the right to expand their territory at the expense of their neighbors. Over time, Moscow's influence grew. The city's strategic location at the crossroads of important trade routes helped it amass wealth and power, while its rulers forged alliances through marriage and diplomacy. As the Golden Horde's grip weakened, thanks to internal strife and the rise of new powers in Asia, Moscow seized its chance. In a series of bold moves, the princes of Moscow began to openly defy Mongol authority, refusing to pay tribute and rallying other Russian states to their cause. The turning point came in the late 15th century, when Ivan III, known as Ivan the Great, finally broke the Mongol yoke for good. In a dramatic standoff on the banks of the Ugra River, the Mongol army faced off against the forces of Moscow. But instead of a bloody battle, the Mongols simply turned and left, marking the end of their dominance over Russia. It was a moment that would echo through history, the birth of a new power, ready to shape its own destiny. The Mongol era had been brutal, but it also forged a new sense of unity and purpose among the Russian people. Moscow emerged from the ashes as the heart of a growing state, its rulers determined never to bow to foreign masters again. The stage was now set for a new chapter, one where Russia would begin its relentless march toward becoming the world's largest country. And as the ambitions of Moscow's rulers grew, so too did the boundaries of their realm, setting the scene for even greater conquests to come. With the Mongol shadow finally lifting, Moscow's rulers wasted no time in transforming their newfound independence into a springboard for expansion. The rise of the Tsars marked a turning point, not just for Moscow, but for the entire region. Ivan IV, better known as Ivan the Terrible, would become the first to officially claim the title of Tsar of all Russia, and his reign would be defined by both ruthless ambition and relentless conquest. Ivan's rule was a storm of contradictions. On one hand, he was a visionary, determined to unite the fractured Russian lands under a single powerful crown. On the other, he was infamous for his cruelty, ruling with an iron fist and crushing any hint of opposition. But it was his hunger for territory that truly set him apart. Ivan launched a series of brutal campaigns against the remnants of the Mongol Khanates, determined to erase their influence once and for all. The conquest of Kazan and Astrakhan opened the gateway to the vast, mysterious lands beyond the Ural Mountains, a region that would soon become synonymous with Russian ambition: Siberia.